All right. Thank you, John. I, the interviewer, am Tim Jones, and the date today is April 17th, 2007. We're at Ottenheimer Library at Pulaski Technical College in North Little Rock, Arkansas. Would you people identify yourselves, please?
My name is Betty Jones.
And my name is Homer Tom Jones, H.T. Jones III.
And 44 years ago, they had a son, and that would be me.
Yeah.
Homer is here to talk about railroading in Arkansas a long time ago.
That's true. And shall I begin now?
Sure.
All right. On December 4, in the year of our Lord 1940, I was hired by the Missouri Pacific Railroad for the job of brakeman. There were 11 of us in the group that was called in the month of December to go to work on the Little Rock to Texarkana route. And we were all assured that we should not expect to be permanently employed. We were to fill in only during the busy holiday season when mail and passenger business was expected to be exceptionally heavy. I was 3 months short of my 18th birthday, and I had been working at a drugstore in Gordon, Arkansas, at wages and hours that, viewed by today's standards, were extremely harsh. I worked 10 hours every day, was off every other Sunday, and I was paid $35 a month. It was a poor job even then, but it was the only one available to a 17-year-old with no marketable skills. The newly hired brakemen were required to make 10 days of student trips on local freight trains or switch engines before receiving any pay, so most of us had to borrow money for expenses. We also had to buy a standard railroad pocket watch, and at that time a new one cost $65, which was a large amount of money. Had to buy a battery-powered hand lantern, leather gloves, and high-top shoes. When we had completed our training trips, we were still woefully ignorant, and the company was ready for us to start to work. We were placed on the brakeman's extra board at North Little Rock, Arkansas. And for the next couple of weeks, we rode trains to and from Texarkana. For my part, I'm sure that my lack of knowledge and experience made me next to useless in train operations. But in those days, Arkansas had what was called a full crew law that required every freight train that had more than 24 cars to be manned by an engineer and a fireman, a conductor, and 3 brakemen. Neophytes such as we merely filled spaces that enabled the company to be in compliance with the law. My first paycheck was for 8 days' work and amounted to $78. A veritable fortune. And of course, the first thing I did was buy an automobile. I bought a 1928 Model A Ford for $100. I paid $50 down and $10 a month until I owned the car. All of our trains were powered by steam locomotives. On our part of the railroad, about 4/5 of the engines used coal for fuel, and the rest were oil burners. There are those who look back on the age of steam with nostalgia, but I am not numbered among them. When I think of steam engines, I remember how incredibly dirty they were, how hot they were in summer, and cold and drafty in winter. The terribly rough ride, and the fact that I had cinders in both eyes most of the time. In 1940 and 1941, before the World War II military buildup started, my subdivision moved no more than 4 or 5 through freight trains each way on any given day. But we operated passenger trains in large numbers. The Missouri Pacific had 5 scheduled daily passenger trains, each direction between St. Louis and Texarkana, 2 daily between Hot Springs and Memphis, 2 daily between Little Rock and Van Buren, 2 between Little Rock and Monroe, 2 between Gordon and Monroe. And on most branch lines, we operated mixed locals, which were freight trains with a passenger coach on the rear for transporting people and railway express goods. Unfortunately, the passenger business did not last. After the Second World War, the number of customers riding passenger trains slowly but steadily diminished as everybody in the country got an automobile. I am reminded of a trip that I and 2 male friends of mine made to New Orleans. In February of 1942, we went to New Orleans for the Mardi Gras. When we arrived there, however, we found that Mardi Gras had been canceled because of the war. And we, of course, we rode passenger trains down there on our passes, railroad passes. And there was no bridge across the Mississippi River then, so we went across on ferry boats. They put the cars on ferry boats. That was an interesting trip anyway. On some parts of our railroad, train movements were controlled by block signal indications, while on other routes, trains were operated by timetable and train orders, which necessitated the employment of telegraph operators every few miles along the line. Every little town had a station agent to take care of the company's business. Section gangs were spread along the railroad, each responsible for maintaining about 8 miles of track. In 1940, trainmen and enginemen could work a maximum of 16 hours in every 24-hour period under federal law, and many did. There were numerous local freight crews that were on duty 14 to 16 hours every day or night. There were no paid vacations, holidays, or sick leaves. We paid all of our expenses away from home. However, costs were not painfully high. When I first started working in Texarkana, I paid 50 cents for a bed and 35 cents for family-style meals at a boarding house. Of course, everything was much cheaper then, but other expenses were comparably low priced, but it must be remembered that this time was before the onset of unbridled inflation. Pay scales were quite low also. I was paid at that time, going from Little Rock to Texarkana, working as a brakeman on a freight train, $8.16. Of course, when I came back from Texarkana to Little Rock, I made another $8.16. And believe me, those were good wages in 1940, 41, 42. I retired from the Union Pacific Railroad, with which the Missouri Pacific had merged on July 1st, 1986. Except for 3 years in the Army during World War II and some periods of leaves of absence while going to college, I never missed a paycheck during those 45 and a half years. 30 of those years I was employed as brakeman or conductor in both passenger and freight service, and the last 15 I worked in an official capacity in Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, and other states. All things considered, it was for me a career that brought a rather high degree of satisfaction. I believe that my work, in some small measure, helped to make the railroad a better and stronger company, and one that is a safer and better workplace for employees. It is gratifying, too, to live in a time and a place where one can retire from the job and still continue to live in reasonable comfort. I am thankful for it.
Well, to extrapolate upon what you've said, it's interesting that you had mentioned relative comfort, because weren't you faced with a relatively uncomfortable situation in 1941?
Uncomfortable in that Japan had attacked us on December 7th, 1941.
When were you drafted?
And we went to war. Well, actually, I was, yes. But I was high on the draft list, and I knew I was going to be drafted very soon, so I volunteered for immediate induction. And I was inducted into the military on February 5, 1943. And of course, I served until October 22nd, 1945.
What was your railroading experience in the Army?
The railroading experience in the Army was somewhat postponed. I spent the first 9 months when I was in military service in the engineers. And I had basic training, technical training, and so on. And I stayed at Fort Belvoir, Virginia for about 6 months. And then moved to Camp Sutton, North Carolina, and my duties there didn't have anything to do with the railroad. But while I was at Camp Sutton, I was there probably 3 or 4 months. I was transferred to Camp Gordon Johnston, Florida, which is about 55 miles south of Tallahassee, right on the Gulf. It was an amphibious training base. But my duties there were to work on the Station Complement Railroad. The local from Tallahassee brought cars in and other cars out, and we placed those cars at various loading locations. And that was pretty good duty there. It was hot. Let's see, I was there 8.5 months, I think. And then, the Army always did things that were, the Army, of course, is a sort of a branch of government, and it operated just about like governments do.
Inscrutably?
Yes, right, yes, inefficiently. Well, I was transferred by rail, passenger, from Florida to Seattle, Washington.
The climate was different, wasn't it?
It was, yes. I wore long handles the whole time I was in Seattle. And I was sent to Fort Lewis, Washington, to a medical facility. I was then in the medical corps for about, 2 months, something like that. Then they turned around and sent me back to New Orleans by rail. And I was in a transportation company, but all we did was have basic training again. In all, I had basic training 4 times. And as an interesting aside, well, I'll get to that a little bit later. We had basic training there, and they took us by truck across Lake Pontchartrain, on that causeway to Slidell, Louisiana. That's where they had the infiltration course and the rifle ranges and all those other things there. Well, let's see, from New Orleans, I was sent to Cheyenne, Wyoming. And I was at Cheyenne about 3 months. It never rained. The wind blew. Dust was ankle deep. And it did snow. This was in the fall. Well, finally, I was sent to California. And I'm trying to remember the name of the base. It was we didn't stay there very long. But the port of embarkation was Fort Lawton, Washington, which is Seattle. And I was sent to Alaska as a replacement on the 714th Railway Operating Battalion. And we operated the railroad with civilians. The railroad was 470 miles from Seward to Fairbanks. And the Army had also built another port at Whittier, Alaska, which intersected the main railroad at Portage. I worked on a kind of an extra board and got sent different places. Spent about 3 months at Seward working on a switch engine. And I worked on, our main base was at Anchorage. I worked on freight trains and passenger trains and switch engines at Anchorage. And it was very interesting. And the Army let me stay up there all winter.
Did they?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Did the weather change very much? Did it go from cold to very cold to bitterly cold to dangerously cold?
Well,
were those the choices?
It's according to what part of Alaska we were in. Along the coast there, of course, the Japanese current comes near, and there's a good deal of precipitation. I recall the month of February in Seward, we saw the sun about 3 days. It was either raining or snowing or the wind blowing 40, 50, 70 miles an hour. We lived in barracks there at Seward. And in the interior, of course, the farther north we went, the colder it became. About 35 below zero was the coldest that I saw, and I did not work in it when it was that cold. I was fortunate that I didn't have to. But Fairbanks, of course, was the northern terminal. It got very cold in Fairbanks, like it got 50 below zero there. But nobody worked outside at 50 below zero. They let us come in at 35 below. That's it.
Kind of.
After spending this winter in Alaska, the war in Europe was over in May of 1945, as our unit departed. So the entire unit left there, and we left from Whittier around the 15th of May, 1945, just about the same time that the war in Europe was over. And we came back to Prince Rupert, British Columbia, and stayed there for a couple of weeks. And then we were moved across Alaska, Western Canada by train. And it was late in May at this time. And I recall the scenery was beautiful at that time of year in Western Canada, going through those mountains there. We went to Winnipeg, and then got 30 days delay en route before going to Camp Claiborne, Louisiana. And we went to Camp Claiborne, and we had basic training again.
Were you well trained by this point?
By that point, there were 900 people in the battalion, and they had a written test on basic soldiering, and I made the highest grade in the battalion because of my vast experience in basic training. We had basic training, and that's what's called technical training. Camp Cleveland, Louisiana, is a few miles, 20 miles west of Alexandria. Alexandria is about the center of the state. And we had, in addition to the basic training, we also had some more technical training because the plan was for us to go to the Pacific area. But fortunately for us and the entire world, the war with Japan terminated in August of 1945. And I was discharged from Camp Claiborne and the Army on October 22nd, 1945, and returned to Gurdon, Arkansas, where I went back to work on the railroad after a brief vacation, a couple of weeks. And that is the story of my military career.
So how long did you work on the railroad there out of Gurdon before you took Uncle Sam up on the offer of the GI Bill?
Well, I worked at Gurdon from end of October until March. And then I went to Little Rock and worked out of Little Rock on freight for a time. And in the summer of 1946, I got on a switch engine at Hot Springs. And then stayed there 3 months thereabouts. In September, a friend of mine named Gene Carlisle was in Henderson State Teachers College in Arkadelphia. Arkadelphia is 35 miles from Hot Springs or thereabouts. And he invited me to come over for a weekend at Henderson, which I did. And that dude talked me into enrolling in Henderson. And it was one of the wisest decisions that I ever made. And there really wasn't any reason why I shouldn't have done it. It didn't cost me anything to go to Henderson, really. The GI Bill was paid nearly everything. And I worked on weekends at Gurdon off the extra board there. Had a little extra money. And I had a car of sorts. It was a Model A Ford also.
So you had graduated from high school
I
10 years prior, hadn't you?
In 1939, I graduated from high school. I was 16 years of age, and the reason I was so young was that, I started before I was 6. I was about 5 and a half when I started school, and then I made 2 grades in 1 year, the second and third grade, because I read well. I was a good reader, mainly. So I was usually a year or 2 behind my peers throughout the time I was going to school until I graduated, which is not good. I didn't mature until I was, say, 15 years old, and all of the girls were taller than I, and they didn't want to go with somebody who was 2 years younger than they, so I didn't have many dates. Okay, I was not looking for a wife at that time, because I later found a wife at Henderson.
Well, and it's interesting that you would say that you found things to be less than fruitful romantically in high school because of the age difference. But you were an older student when you went to college, were you not?
Yeah,
So,
yes.
I'm sure were there other people your age that were also on GI Bill?
Many. And I was 23 years old when I started at Henderson. And there were a lot of veterans there. The enrollment at Henderson before the war had been somewhere around 350 total enrollment. And it ballooned after the war, mostly with the influx of veterans, to 900. When I graduated, there were about 950 students enrolled at Henderson. And as I mentioned, I did meet a woman there whom I subsequently married.
Who asked who out the first time?
We won't go into that.
What was your first date?
I don't remember. What?
Didn't we go to Gables and eat steak?
Yeah, we did.
Yes.
Yeah, on a Sunday night
Mm-hmm.
Where was Gables?
in Arkadelphia.
Yeah, Arkadelphia had kind of a steakhouse.
Were you impressed?
Of course. I married him, didn't I?
Well, after you went to Henderson did you graduate in 4 years?
Well, actually it was 49. I went one summer. And I usually carried 17 to 18 hours. I was a good student, made good grades. The last 2 semesters, I made straight A's across the board there. Which, I have a picture that came out of this newspaper, the school newspaper, and there were 10 of us who had all A's, about 950 students. So competition was fierce.
Well, at that point you graduated, you moved, didn't you?
Hope, Arkansas. We moved there and spent the summer, and I worked on a local between Hope and Nashville. Of course, my bride was from Nashville, Arkansas, Howard County, and she was close to home, and she was rather inexperienced as a wife, but she tried hard.
Subsequently, I'm aware that she got a good deal of on-the-job training.
Yes, more than somewhat.
Y'all moved to
Baton Rouge,
Baton Rouge in
Yeah.
1950?
1949.
49.
Yeah, fall 49.
All of 49.
Oh, and David was born there with
Yeah, David was born there.
So you were with child when you moved.
Mhm.
Yeah. And
We moved into an efficiency apartment over an ice cream parlor.
in Tiger Town.
Yeah, right there on campus. That's all we could find. And every morning I got the newspaper and went out and looked for a place to live. Finally, I think right before we had to pay another month's rent, I found a place and we moved into it, and that's where we stayed until till we came back to Hope.
1875 Perkins Road.
Perkins Road.
Yeah, we've been there since then, and it seems to have diminished in size, and the neighborhood has declined also. But that was interesting experience. When we moved back to Hope, I went to work on the railroad on switch engine there at Hope, and stayed at Hope for 13 more years, didn't we?
Well, I thought it was 14, but
Yeah, well,
anyway. It was interesting the night we left Baton Rouge. He had an exam, and we were anxious to get back to Arkansas. So when he got back from his last exam, we loaded the car and David in a bassinet on the back seat and headed for Nashville, Arkansas.
drove all night.
We got outside town and we had a flat.
That was near Black's, wasn't it?
It was on an overpass, and Homer had to unload the back of the car
All your worldly
with
possessions.
all our worldly possessions to get the tire out, and it had to be inflated.
It was not,
The spare was flat.
Were you composed and calm?
Well,
this time?
up till the time I was rolling that tire down toward a service station that I had seen at the foot of that overpass, and I lost control of it, and it went over in the bushes there somewhere.
Over the side of the overpass.
That did cause me some consternation.
And there I sat up there in that car with that baby, and
Was it dark?
it was dark, and there was sort of a swamp all around us, and owls hooting, and it was a scary experience.
But they had left the air compressor on, and I was able to, I don't know how much air I put in there, but it was sufficient that we could go on.
After you found it?
After I found it, yes. Well, I don't think I had a flashlight.
No.
Oh, it was lightning, that's what it was, and I was able to see a gleam of it over there.
From the lightning.
Yeah, from the lightning.
It was quite a night, and we got back to Nashville sometime the next morning. I don't recall.
9 o'clock, something like that.
It was a harrowing night.
How long before you set up a house in Hope?
Oh, real soon.
Right away, yeah.
Right away. We
If you'd stayed too long, Utley would have charged you rent, wouldn't it?
might have.
Now, listen, don't talk about Ray Utley. He was always good to me. When we married, went over there, that Model A, and Ray saw it, and the next trip we got over there, he had a 1949 Ford for us that he swapped that A model.
Yeah.
Good swap. Of course, he threw his daughter with it.
A good deal all the way around.
Yeah, yes, good deal. Oh,
We moved to Hope, and we had an apartment at 126 North Hervey Street,
yes.
wasn't it? I don't know how I remember that date, but
It was a 2-room apartment, wasn't it?
and Charlie and Grace Reed had lived in it for years and years, the same apartment.
Grace is her mother's sister, yeah,
And
was.
we lived there quite a while, and then, well, we had Mike, your brother, and Brian were born in Hope, Arkansas during the time we
Well, there's a
stayed
little
there.
more to that story, though. She had, when David was about a year and a half old, she started having arthritis.
He wasn't that old.
Well,
But
it was when we were living at Miss Arnold's, wasn't it? Yeah. And,
it was on Avenue D. It really
Well,
got bad, yeah.
Rheumatoid arthritis started when you were, how old?
I was
20?
About 20, 21.
Somewhere thereabouts. And it progressed, and during that first couple of years that she had it, she lost the use of movement of her left elbow, which is frozen in a 90-degree angle. And of course she was having other damage to it. She was under treatment from our primary caregiver, but he was not a rheumatologist. It didn't help a whole lot. Well, she had this until arthritis pretty badly, until Mike was born in 1952. And then it went into remission until 1965. And during that period of time, she had two more children, Brian and Tim. And
when you were about 15 months old, that it came back again.
yeah, after we had moved from Hope to Little Rock.
North Little Rock.
Yeah, well, we moved to Little Rock first and lived a year, and then built a house in North Little Rock and moved over there. And that's when, 1965 is when the arthritis came back on her. It has not relented since then.
What was your favorite thing about Hope?
Watermelons.
Friends.
We had a lot of good friends and enjoyed it there.
Hope was an old southern town, and it was a good place to live, and it was a good place for kids. We enjoyed being there, but I had to move my employment to Little Rock because the switch engines no longer existed in Hope. So we had to come to Little Rock, North Little Rock, to work. And so we have not been in Hope. We've gone back on visits just a few times, but we haven't spent any time there. And there are very few people still living in Hope that we know. Of course, that's been 40 years.
You weren't entirely happy with having to move to Little Rock.
Oh,
No.
Oh, she cried on the whole way up there. And you were just, 5 months old. Well, we moved in August, I think, and you were born in March of that year.
Yeah, 5 months old when we moved.
3.
And my sister Becky rode with me and took care of you on the ride up there, and I cried all the way, I think. And I guess you had the other boys with you, or I don't remember if I had any more with me or not.
We had 2 cars, all right.
And we moved to Little Rock. We hated to leave the country club and the bridge games and the family monthly picnics and all the good things that we enjoyed doing there. But it was a necessity.
The country club, we paid $200 to join it, and the dues were $6.40 a month, I think, for the country club. And we had a 9-hole golf course, clubhouse, and
Swimming pool.
a swimming pool and a lake. Well, when they built the swimming pool, though, the dues went up to $9.
Okay.
Yeah. But we,
That's how the upper crust enjoyed Home, Arkansas.
yeah.
Your oldest brother David used to enjoy trying to play golf or going with Homer around the golf course.
Well, in the last, about the last year we lived there, you know, he would ride his bicycle from where we lived on, let's see, was it on 14th then?
Yeah.
When we lived on 14th Street, he rode it. No, it was later.
No.
It was after we moved over on Washington Street. And he would ride his bicycle out there and play golf.
He was 13 when we moved to
Yeah.
Little Rock and started at Pulaski Heights
Junior high.
Junior High.
Yeah.
And that's where your two children started, isn't it?
It is indeed.
I recall David was on the golf team, the junior high golf team at Pulaski Heights.
I don't know if they have one of those anymore.
Probably not.
So I retired in 1986. That will be 21 years, the 1st of July. And it's been a pretty good career, that nearly 21 years.
Second career as a man of leisure.
Yeah. Well, of course, the great thing about retiring, when you have sufficient income, don't have to work, is that it enables one to do what one wants to do rather than what one's forced to do. And the first few years, we did a good deal of traveling. Europe, went to Europe, England, a couple of times, Canada, and, well, we went to the edge of Mexico too, didn't we? Various places.
Did you go to California too?
Yeah,
Well, we did that
that was later, yes.
later on. That was about last 10 years ago or
It
thereabouts.
was 1992.
Was
I
it?
guess, quite a while ago, yeah, 15 years ago. But, see, about the last year we had a business meeting at British Columbia. Vancouver, British Columbia. And I took her with her. We stayed up there a week at that business meeting.
It was a great trip.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
We had a good time.
Had lunch and
Yeah.
on the Space Needle,
Hmm.
even though I don't like heights.
Did it sway in the wind?
I don't recall.
What did you say, 5 more minutes, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, never made it back to Alaska though.
No, and I have wanted to go. She doesn't want to go to Alaska.
No.
But probably we won't ever go back to Alaska, but they won't miss us.
I might add that during the time we lived in Hope, before you were born, I was in the florist business
Yeah.
for a couple of years and enjoyed doing that and was active in the garden club and 2 bridge clubs, and then after you were born, when you were 3 months old, along with my friend Ida Stewart, we entered the Arkansas chicken cooking contest. And I guess my only claim to fame is that I had my picture made with
Robert Taylor?
Robert Taylor.
Yeah.
And Rosemary Clooney too, wasn't it?
Yeah, and Rosemary
Rosemary
Clooney.
Clooney.
And after winning in the district, I went to the state competition, and I was second runner-up, second place in the state. And that's where Rosemary Clooney was.
Was that Chicken Betty?
Yeah,
That was the name of the concoction.
yeah. It was good.
Oh, I know what I wanted to ask y'all. How did you meet Charles and Pearl Walker?
Oh,
We,
Well-
we moved into one side of a duplex. They lived on Main Street. No, they lived on one side, and we moved in the other side. And they immediately fell in love with David.
well,
He was a year and a half.
when we moved in there, Charles and Pearl had an accident, automobile accident of sorts, and I don't recall what Charles's problem was, but he was in the hospital, and Pearl wanted to take David down there to see him, and she did, and from that point on, well, they were really another set of grandparents.
I wish
too.
you could have known them. So,
They were wonderful people.
yes. Well, you did when
I
they
didn't-
came to
I
Hope.
didn't know them. It was
to
only,
Arlington, yeah.
When we would go through there and visit, and
Yeah.
Yeah,
got to spend a good deal of time with them.
Yeah.
you were so young when we left there, but they were fine people.
He was there, and he said 5
Is he-
more minutes,
is
and
he
that
telling us
5 minutes
that?
has elapsed.
Well, thank you for participating.
Well, we can come back
Sure.
and talk more, but